Hi, I'm Alex, I'm a software engineer and I no longer live in Japan. Here's a quick recap. So I moved to Japan at the beginning of 2022 during COVID. I worked remotely as a software engineer. My company allowed me to relocate. I lived in Chiba right here. And my last video was uploaded more than a year ago. So long story short, in February 2024, this year, I moved back to Melbourne, Australia. And aside from everything else going on in my life, Japan itself played a very big role in my decision to move back. I want to go through the mistakes that I've made, and perhaps I could help you as well if you plan to make the life-changing move to Japan. So let me just start by saying I've always loved Japan. The food, the people, the onsens, and baby metal. None of that changed. Most of the things I'm going to mention left a dent in me because I had different expectations going into this. I realized that the few weeks of annual leave that I get to see the parts that I do like, I can all the same enjoy while living in Australia full time. So I read some of the old comments on the channel and a lot of you guys assumed that it was a dream setup. Getting to live in Japan while enjoying the benefits of working remotely for a foreign company, which means not subjecting myself to the infamous Japanese working culture. And I thought so too originally, until I realized that when you effectively start your life over, you have to socialize, unless you want to become a hermit. And when you work full-time, you can only do so after work, which by itself is a challenge, but I took it to the next level because I lived right over here, which is just across the river from Tokyo Prefecture, but is technically Chiba Prefecture. In case you didn't know, all the events, all the interesting stuff is in Tokyo. Even though this does not seem far, it's an hour-long trip one way to Shinjuku. Not easy to do with a busy work schedule. So as a result, sometimes I would not socialize for weeks. I had not realized how much impact this would have on my mental health, but honestly, this was probably one of the top 3 reasons for me moving back to Australia. If I were to start over, I would definitely move close to all the action. After 2 years in Japan, my Japanese has improved, but I'm still unable to handle anything remotely difficult, like a conversation with a tax office employee. I was kind of hoping that my Japanese would improve naturally after moving to Japan, but you have to be immersed in the Japanese speaking environment. And again, remote work does not allow for that. This is actually a thing that I had not expected to affect me at all. I had traveled to Japan many times and I always found the city layout, the urban vibe, the concrete kind of charming. Turns out for me, being a tourist and actually living there are 2 completely different things. This is what a typical suburb in Melbourne looks like. And this is what the city I lived in Japan looked like. You can see that the grass is nowhere to be found, but it wasn't just a lack of greenery, it's also the uniformity of the buildings, as if they're North Korean citizens watching a military parade. All of the buildings are either beige, gray, or brown. I grew up in a moderately dry environment with low-ish UV all year round. In Japan though, the humidity gets insanely high, especially during and around Tsuyu, which is the rainy season. The temperatures get up to 32-33 degrees Celsius with humidity being as high as 85%. It's somewhat typical for Southeast Asia, but let me show you how my skin felt about it. If you're sensitive, please turn away. Ready? So neither me nor doctors could figure out the roots of this condition, but nothing helped. It would reappear over and over again, and it hasn't appeared once since I've come back from Japan, which I take as a sign that I'm incompatible with the Japanese summer. Tokyo is a very crowded place. Actually, all the big cities and popular spots in Japan are. And with international tourists, once again, unleashed, you kind of have to get used to being slightly squeezed all the time. This also means that you have to get used to planning everything way in advance, which is not something I excel at, as you will find out. I wasn't sure whether to include it, but please bear in mind that this is my personal experience and not an objective measure in any way. Japan is a collectivist society, and the main rule by which people live is not to cause trouble to others. What that means in real life is that you're supposed to, at all times, analyze the expectations of others and act accordingly. Japan is very orderly and organized because of that principle. It's more like this, and I'm more like this. I love being able to change things on a whim. I decide where to go on a Saturday, that very Saturday morning. I'm guilty of texting friends to come meet me in an hour. This goes against the grain of the Japanese society. People schedule meetings with friends days and often weeks in advance. Restaurants will hold you accountable for how many people show up to a reservation. It is actually one of the things that is keeping the Japanese society uniform. So this is one of the first things that comes up if you Google the culture of apologizing in Japan. Japanese people perceive apologies very differently from Western people. I read the research that compared the culture of apologizing in America to that in Japan, where for American people, an apology establishes who is at fault, so it's a recognition of guilt. For Japanese people, it serves a completely different role. It's more of a recognition of the burden suffered by the target. For a foreigner though, this may feel very challenging, and I most certainly felt that at times, having to apologize for little things. After some time, it just started feeling like living in constant guilt. Okay, so this isn't just me, Japanese people complain about it too. Everything from government-related processes to signing up for gym membership requires you sitting down with a staff member and listening to their very thorough and very lengthy explanation of the process. For example, opening a bank account took me nearly a month. On the first visit, I sat down with a bank employee and I was taken through a lengthy explanation of how the bank account opening process works. So I had to fill out a pretty long form, obviously by hand. And one of the fields in the form was the landline phone number of my employer, which I believed at the time my company did not have. I told that to the employee, and after a 2-hour negotiation and an escalation to the manager, during which I was told that companies without a phone number do not exist, they agreed to use my employment contract as the verification for my employment instead of the landline phone number. I came back in a month. I was met by the same employee. I was given the same form. We went through the same process of negotiation, during which I had to explain the previous history of me trying to open the bank account. Got escalated to the very same manager who said the same phrase, that companies without a phone number do not exist. Long story short, after some time, I managed to convince them that I do have a job, and they did open me a bank account. I lost some nerves and probably about 15 years of my life in the process. So there are parts of the infrastructure in Japan that are world-class, probably like top 3 in the world. Public transportation is one example. If you've had a chance to travel to Japan, you know how good the trains are. But if you look at the other side, for example, payments, they're like the bottom of the barrel. And the reason for that is Japan has this like very unique culture of not being able to quickly adapt to technological changes. Some of my friends told me that they used to carry around up to $400 worth of cash in their wallets at all times because that was the only universally accepted method of payment. Post-COVID, the situation definitely has changed. And now it looks like this. So what you see on the screen is a sign in a convenience store with all the accepted payment methods. So you can see how many there are. You go to one store and they would only accept, say, PayPay. Another store would only accept cash and Visa and MasterCard, right? The situation is definitely improving, and I really do hope that in 5 years or so, it will all be reduced to just a handful of payment methods. Okay, so I have this laptop with me on which I have a list of things that I really appreciate about Japan. The first thing that comes to mind is obviously food. Japanese food is of very high quality. Grocery store food is great. Fast food is also great. It's cheap, it's very tasty. Tokyo has all sorts of different restaurants. I was surprised to find out that Indian food in Japan is insanely good. If you're interested, drop me a comment and I will let you know which Indian restaurant to go to in Tokyo. Convenience, that is a big one. That includes public transportation. That includes convenience stores, vending machines, you name it. Prices are very low, especially if you're a drinker. The sense of novelty, if you want to feel like you're on an alien spaceship or an alien planet, go to Japan, that's the place. I think it's a big one for me. It's the obsessions in Japan. If you're into vintage records or, I don't know, film photography, whatever kind of difficult to find stuff, you will find that in Japan, and you will find people that go so deep on that topic like you wouldn't believe. Travel in Japan is great. It's my absolute personal favorite. There's so much to experience and see anywhere you go. There's beautiful nature, there's beautiful historical buildings and towns, there's onsens and ryokans, which is the Japanese traditional inn. And one more addition to the list that I've experienced for the first time this year is skiing in Japan, which is apparently unparalleled. For the same amount of money that you would spend skiing one day in Australia, you can probably ski for 3 or 4 days in Japan, all inclusive, with gear rental, etc. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.